As English teachers, we find that way too many English language learners expect far too much of themselves when it comes to learning new vocabulary words.
Especially how many they learn each week. There's a lot of people out there promising a lot of big things. So today we're going to break down how many words you can really learn in a week.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Wide World Friends English. Today, I want to ask you a question. I want to start with a question. How many English words were you learning at the beginning in 1 week's time? About how many were you learning? 10, 20, 50, 100?
And a big question is, how many are you learning now? There are different educational systems out there. Some tend to be more memory focused, where they're trying to make it easy to test. So they're doing things like tests and quizzes and memorization and trying to focus on those multiple choice kind of answers. While there are other cultures that tend to be more application focused, and so they tend to focus on things like teaching principles, and then from that, using projects or labs in order to figure out if the student actually has a competency to apply the principles they just learned. And this is a big deal because depending on what kind of culture you come from, depends on how you are likely to approach vocabulary learning. Some tend to be more test-oriented, and some tend to be more application-oriented. Generally speaking, obviously this is a scale depending on where you're at and depending on what kind of culture you come from. But it's important to keep this in mind when you approach vocabulary building, because where you come from and where you've surrounded yourself really comes to bear when it comes to vocabulary building.
So which one is better? Being from a more application-oriented system, it's easy for us to say, yeah, the one that requires more application is better for learning English. But doing this method seems painfully slow to people from memory-based learning because we're not doing as many vocabulary at a time. We're not doing 10 grammar rules in one class. We're not memorizing them. We're using them. We're learning about them by principle. We're learning them by synonyms. We're learning them by the way that we use them, not necessarily by memorization. But that also means that we tend to hang on to these words longer. We tend to remember these grammar rules better because we don't forget when we stop using them, and we don't forget when we stop memorizing. We don't feel like we slip as much. However, we're patterned that way in our education system. This system might not work for everybody. So let's take a look at some other factors.
So for example, in your school years, your brain's still developing. So that time is meant for education, learning, development, and for helping your family. So for us as adults, we have to take whatever method we're going to use with a grain of salt when it comes to all of our educational systems. On the other hand, as an adult, your brain's taking all this information in, and you also have to balance that with the realistic expectation of the life around you. You have other things going on. You have work, you have life, you have kids, you have families. And it's not just all I'm doing is focusing on vocabulary words this week.
Another thing to evaluate is your English level. If you are an intermediate English language learner, you are still in a phase where you're taking in a lot of words. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of things not related to what you've learned before. You're being introduced to intangible words. You're starting to build that vocabulary out. You're still working heavily on bringing words into your active vocabulary. So you're dealing with a lot more words there than you would be in the advanced levels, where your job is mainly to deepen what you already know and to connect it to other things that you kind of sort of know, but you need to know better. So advanced learners should not be learning tons and tons of vocabulary and stacks of vocabulary. They should be focusing on using efficiently what they already have and deepening their knowledge of what they already have, so that learning more words just comes as you go about life. But with intermediates, you're still in that flashcard phase. You're still working on building those terms out in your mind, in your life, and therefore your vocabulary learning strategies are going to be a bit more similar to the beginner's levels than they are to the advanced levels.
So how many words can you actually learn in a week? In our opinion, for an adult English language learner who has a lot of other things going on in their life, we would probably suggest sticking to about 5 words a week, which we know is not a lot, but there is a catch to this.
We mean picking words from a specific context and not randomly, okay? You're not going to collect this random list of advanced English words you should know. No, you should be working on things from a context that you encountered in your life that you know is relevant to you. Make it relevant. We also mean learning these 5 words along with their common synonyms, which means you're actually learning more than 5 words. You're learning a lot of other words that you should be somewhat familiar with, that you've seen around, and you're tying them to roots right away.
We also mean studying some of the history behind the words, using some picturesque images or symbols to help you remember those, trying to find common idioms or phrases for you to be able to kind of pair them and attach them with. Basically, to see these words as a native would see these words. Try to get all the culture behind them for you to be able to use them in a native like way. And we also mean to be able to use these. So that means use them in your writing, use them in your speaking. So we're not just trying to focus on a reading comprehension test that we can get the right multiple choice question because we did the matching. That's not the goal of this. It's to actually be able to use it for a long time so that you can recall it and you can do better than just getting a good grade on a test. You can actually produce it. And that is going to stick with you a lot longer than being able to pass that test.
So, with these 5 words, what we mean is learn by doing, not by memorization. By memorization, 5 words is nothing. But by application, 5 words is actually quite ambitious.
Frankly, the students that we have that use this kind of strategy, they find that 5 words almost feels overwhelming because there's so much information, especially in the advanced levels, that are kind of wrapped up in these words. And it's because you're not just learning them, you're not just remembering them, you're acquiring them. You're making those words a part of your English self. You're not just like looking at them and recognizing that's a word. I know that now.
Right. You're making them active vocabulary, and that means acquiring them. So there are strategies out there that help you learn 1,000 words in a week. And what this idea is made of is teaching you the meanings of the different parts of words, our prefixes, our suffixes, and some of the popular roots. Yes, you can learn a lot of words that way, but what you're really learning is a solid guess as to what that word probably means. You're not actually learning what that word actually means, any of the culture behind it, in which context you can use it, how you should exactly be using it with paralanguage and body language or an emphasis or tone of voice. You're not learning any of that. You're just giving yourself a good guess as to what that word that you don't know might mean. And that doesn't help with all words. That only helps with the longer words that have those word parts. Shorter words are much more difficult to figure out.
Yeah, and also these words that you're going to learn 1,000 of them in a week, a lot of them carry different subtle meanings, even in between the same roots. Even with words that are in slightly different parts of speech or context, you will find that they can carry different nuances. So just because you know those roots and just because you know all of our prefixes doesn't mean that you actually know the word and you're able to use it how we use it.
It will help you recognize it when you read it or when you see it in a test. It's not going to help you produce that word, because then you'd be trying to put together prefixes and suffixes and roots in your mind to try to come up with a word that may not actually be a word. So that's the danger to learning with that method.
If you want to learn vocabulary and to be able to express yourself naturally and fluently, you're gonna have to slow down. We've said that a lot on this channel because that is one of the main ways that we get to fluency. It's not by making big sprints and just exhausting ourselves. It's not studying for that TOEFL exam for 6 hours a day and that produces fluency. That is not the case. It's slowing down, taking your time, acquiring these things over a long time, reinforcing them regularly, and then actually producing them, actually using them. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have to slow way down.
So to help you with this, we created a free advanced English vocabulary study guide. And we walked through it in a video earlier this year. You can check it out at the link below. And if you want to watch that video, you can check it out here as well. In that video, we walk you through using that guide step by step.
All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will catch you on the next one.